All right, here we go. Jed's on his way. He's not here yet, so I just decided to start. Sorry for my breathing. I've been ill, okay? I've been ill. So, Paul's homeroom this morning, he was talking about the church, orthodoxy, deconstruction, the nuns, and he had this little intro. It was like a 24-minute intro, and then he played a live stream that Lance did yesterday entitled, what was it entitled? Chezi, if you're here, hello, my friend. So Paul's video is how orthodoxy is unwittingly positioned to pick up post-mainline Christians. And I think a lot of that's probably coming from his conversation with Reformed Zoomer. Dude, this is how little I'm on YouTube, or Lance Morning, is that I'd never heard of Reformed Zoomer, so I had no idea. But the Paul conversation is, post-mainline. What is it? Post-mainline? What's the name of it? Americans and their meaning crisis. Zach, buenos dias. Lance, buenos dias. So I think this will be a little bit of a continuation. I don't know if when Jed's here, he can remind me. I don't even know where our first conversation was posted. If it was on Grail Country or if it was on Randas United. But we had a conversation a while back that we would have loved to have made into a series. But, life is busy with work and kids and everything else called, I think the video was called The Calvinist to Deconstruction Pipeline. And Jed and I were talking about some of our history in the Reformed world. Jed was like legit PCA, deep in that Reformed world, and I was more young, restless, and Reformed. So we have our own personal experience, and Jed is, he's a good conversation partner, period, especially for somebody like me, because Jed reads a lot, and he's a very smart guy. And so I think he reached out because he's one of those guys I would just love to talk to all the time, and it's just hard to make it all work. So I think he reached out because he had seen one of my Polanyi posts about Polanyi and knowledge, modernist assumptions of knowledge. And you know it, you get it, Science Mike Gunger. I listened to the Deconstructionists for a long time. I don't even know if they're still doing a podcast. Are they? I'm not sure. I have not listened to it forever. However, I did watch a sweet Peter Rollins video from some kind of event conference thing that he did, where there was like musicians and Elliot Morgan, the guy he does the Fundamentalist podcast with, was there kind of emceeing it. There were musicians and things. There were different speakers, and I saw Gunger in the crowd, so I know they still hang out. I think Rollins and Rob Bell and Gunger and the Gungers. Gungers make some great music, by the way. There's some like the Moon Song. His wife, what's her name? Anyhow, she's fantastic. Jed, my man, we're here. Okay, just holding it down.
Right on. Can you hear me all right?
I can. Loud and clear, my buddy.
Fantastic. How are you, Luke?
I'm finally convalescing, I think, from this whatever illness that I had that gives adults fevers. It's been like it's been a multi-week illness. It's not been great, but I'm slowly recovering. Now I'm to the point where I can just kind of meathead through, and it's like an excuse to clear my lungs, and I can. It's one of those illnesses that I couldn't just it wasn't just like try harder. It was like out of
And just
commission.
rub some dirt on it.
Yeah. So
Well, cool, man.
what's your main vision and impetus of this live stream? What I think we should do is just, I don't like to put out the link until we feel sufficiently like we've voiced our ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking like, I know you had the Polanyi quote that I had responded to. Like lately, I think what's been kind of percolating in my mind is just like deconstruction. So, have you seen that guy, Dan McClellan? His YouTube shorts. He's a biblical scholar.
I don't think so.
Anyway, it's pretty good content, but he's like comes from like this critical, he's a critical biblical scholar and kind of debunking a bunch of commonly held, typically Protestant understandings of scripture, but
Right.
From like a critical scholarship framework.
Right. Brandon Graham Dempsey, perk up your ears. This is what he's talking about. Have you followed any of that guy's stuff? The metamodernism, Brandon Graham Dempsey thing?
I haven't.
Okay.
No.
Yeah,
But
you're not as deep into the TLC cult as the rest of us, but
no, I don't know the secret handshake. But
anyhow, continue.
yeah, so I was thinking about like the role that kind of biblical criticism has played back like the last couple hundred years in kind of radically transforming the landscape of especially Protestant belief, right? Because it arises out of kind of these Protestant sensibilities and kind of out of the Enlightenment and certain kind of empirical commitments that the truth can be discovered through this empirical process.
Yeah.
And, as it turns out, like a lot can be discovered through an empirical process, but truth is not one of them, right? You can discover a lot of like interesting, discrete facts about any given system through a critical method, right? And it can be very helpful, like science and like a scientific method. Empirically, it yields fantastic results that are demonstrable. Like if you want to make a good medicine, there's a process to do that, right? But when you get into these questions of like truth and deeper questions of meaning and how we construct meaning, all of a sudden those tools tend to fall apart, right? They have kind of there's a limitation in terms of their actual sense-making value, right? So if we want to look at like biblical scholarship, so what do you do if you find out that, the Pentateuch wasn't written by Moses, or that there are potentially errors in scripture, or that the synoptic accounts don't entirely line up with John's account of the resurrection in the Bible, right? What do you do with all of this kind of stuff? Or these become defeaters for belief, or do they help you reframe potentially the way you're looking at some of these things? And so those are just some of the ambient things that I've been thinking about and seeing like why, there's this move towards deconstruction to a certain degree, maybe less than a few years ago. It seems like I'm not seeing it as much, but I haven't been as online as much. So maybe I'm ignorant there, but, it's like, well, where is that coming from, and what's driving that? What are the outcomes for people who, in one way or another find themselves leaving Christianity? And, I think that deconstruction piece is kind of, it's like a watershed moment. It either keeps you in the faith or it's your off ramp,
Yeah.
And so anyway.
So in light of kind of the broader TLC conversations that have been happening, so what Paul played on his homeroom video this morning that I just watched was he had a little intro, like a 25-minute intro, and then he played this live stream that Lance did on Grail Country the other day about orthodoxy, interest in orthodoxy, people converting to orthodoxy, because on YouTube and online there's a huge move that way, and a lot of it has to do with this post Jordan Peterson phenomenon, like all these Russell Brand converting to Christianity, like all that kind of phenomenon, Ali Hershey Ali, and Tom Holland, Christian atheists, all that stuff. So part of that is I think people rediscovering stuff that we're talking about, that's a move outside of this hypercritical modern thing. Because would you say that basically, what, to go back to what you were saying, that empiricism, which I would call like empiricism, when you label a narrative onto it, like a hypothesis, and then that becomes this absolute mechanistic thing, you're moving into the realm of empiricism, because or into scientism, because radical empiricism is just phenomenology. It's just observation.
Right.
It's not, there's not even a narrative attached to it necessarily.
can't.
But when you attach a narrative to it, it becomes this scientific thing that's provable, disprovable. And I think there's a utility in proving systems through testing that gets desired results. So it's almost utilitarian in the sense that you're
Right.
getting what you think that you want, but it never, science is never going to get you what you need. It's kind of like that. I don't know. I like Alan Moore has a great quote on art, I suppose, where he talks about grammar and magic and spelling, and that everything is really grammar, and culture arises from cult and all these things. And he says the job of the artist isn't to give people what they want, it's to give them what they need. And so that's
Right.
almost the difference with science. I see science as fundamentally kind of egoic and rooted in the will. It's trying to, it has power to get to express your will in the world and give you what you want. It's just whether or not your will and what you want is giving you what you need, which is a different realm of truth. That's probably more the realm of truth.
Yeah.
What you
And
need.
I think that that's like, how do you ascertain, how do you come to a, a vision of the truth, right? And I think that there's, like, for me, biblical scholarship, critical scholarship has been actually helpful for me. Like, and not in a way, like there's been like a, an element of liberation to understand a little bit of how the text is composed, maybe some of the problems that are latent in the text itself as you're reading it at the literal level, like this doesn't match with that, and whatever those may be. I think what it liberated me to do. Now, fortunately, when I was kind of in that phase of what maybe some would call a deconstruction, I was reading Origin, and so it was, I think there was something more compelling about his overall approach that lended weight toward that spiritual reading of scripture. And I'm like, oh, like critical scholarship in some senses emancipates us from needing to have the text literally say everything we want it to say. Right. And it gave me maybe some insight into, I'm still Protestant, so I'm not one of those guys that's going to convert to, Catholicism or Orthodoxy. But made me realize, like, a lot of what we see in the deconstruction movement is just a deeply Protestant impulse collapsing upon itself, kind of like a wave is finally crested and it's breaking. Right. It's just, it's thoroughly Protestant in its orientation. And realizing, like, well, maybe you can go back and interrogate some of the roots of what happens using a critical method. Fine. What happened in history? How did we get here? But then you have to ask the secondary question that I think a lot of people lack the tools, because we've never been taught, we've never been trained in other kinds of methods of thinking and knowing. Right. So, we're going to try to figure this all out in a very cerebral context, not a very contemplative context, not a very prayerful context. Right. We're just going to go in and try to figure this out. Is if you've just based your faith upon a relationship with a discrete set of facts, so that so long as they all line up, you can stay in the faith. Like, once that begins to crumble a little bit, you're either going to go one direction or the other. Is you're going to just say, fine, this is all BS and I'm out. Or you're going to take a deeper look and you're going to begin to evaluate some of these questions from a different vantage point. Right. And so it's different lensing. Right. And I think when that Polanyi diagram that you showed, like, he has like, all these different domains of thought and knowing and understanding. It's like the critical piece is okay if it's contextualized in its own space, if it has its own little domain that it can occupy, but it doesn't overspill its bounds. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that that's where those methods, it's like, well, they're useful, but when in our, you know, in our kind of our modern rationalistic world, that kind of post enlightenment veer towards the empiricism is a is like it's this crass overreaction that basically says, it gives you kind of like this uh, monocled vision of the world as opposed to a multi-lensed vision, like the mosaic
Yeah.
vision you've talked about in the past, right? You need to be working with more than one window open on your computer, right? So,
Right.
yeah,
So like,
this is that diagram. I don't know. Why don't you dive a little bit into Polanyi and kind of what you're pulling from him? Because I think it's really pertinent to like what we're discussing here.
so there are some really great summaries of Polanyi that I've just picked up over the years. So like one of his books is called this tacit dimension. And so essentially like looking at this chart, um, he'll say things like there are these, I think he has a list. There's either 3 or 4, or at least this is my distillation of it, of modernist assumptions of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And they are is that it is focal. So like
Mm-hmm.
that's that myopic thing. You can just see it and look at it. Knowledge
Yeah.
is, or that it's conscious, like it's in your self-awareness. It's conscious to you. And tied with that is that it's articulable, which would be like it's propositional. Essentially, it's
Mm-hmm.
something that you can put into words. And that it's exhaustively explicit, I think, is another one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so essentially, like that's almost a way to flesh out propositional knowledge and propositional tyranny. I mean, that's kind of like the Vervaeke way of summarizing what you're saying, is that if your faith or your belief is mainly buttressed and held up by this propositional tyranny and thinking that most of your knowledge is propositional,
Mm-hmm.
like that's really easy to poke holes in, because you don't really, what Polanyi I think really illustrates is really in line with that McDonald quote that I love. The fact is no man understands anything. Is because, and it's something that Jordan Peterson talks about all the time, is that a lot of your knowledge is, I would say, I don't know, I've just thrown around numbers before because that's what I do, but like a huge percentage of your knowledge, probably, I don't know, I don't even think it's extreme to say like it's over 90%, over 95% isn't articulable. Like, I mean, you could maybe reverse engineer it and figure out
Mm-hmm.
how to articulate it, but that's a lot of what it is. A lot of your consciousness, and Peterson illustrates this through like AI vision, is inhibitory. Even human vision is like you're shutting things out, because that's why when you're like tripping on LSD or mushrooms or something, you're getting all this stimulus that's like overwhelming. You can't deal with it.
Yeah.
And so most of your vision is shutting things out so that you can focus.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of Polanyi's. He talks about like, I should go get a bunch of quotes that he has. Is just like, um, a lot of what his knowledge paradigm is about is what he calls subsidiary focal integration, which is basically like building neural pathways in your mind where you'll focus on something, and he'll use an illustration like riding a bike or playing piano or scales or whatever. You build these little skills that
Mm-hmm.
then you integrate, so you focus on them, and then
Mm-hmm.
you integrate them so that they become subsidiary, so that you can focus on other things to
Mm-hmm.
integrate, and then that all becomes unconscious. It becomes tacit, the tacit dimension,
Yeah.
and it's part of your body. You embody it so that you don't have to focus your prefrontal cortex on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bulk of your knowledge. Most of everything you're doing in your life is stuff that you're not consciously thinking about, or else you couldn't function.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, the the way we see the the way we see is a process of elimination. Just physical vision itself is
Yeah.
eliminative. It's actually not like what we're seeing is not. I don't see in front of me or here behind me. Like I don't see the quantum field that is
Right.
giving shape to the louvers that are behind me. Right. I see the louvers, the shades here. And so I'm filtering a lot of reality out so that I have just enough of a vision of what's in front of me that I can function in the world around me. Right.
Yeah.
And like what I think we don't have much of a tolerance for, even like maybe postmodernism is has is in some sense kind of recorrecting in this direction, with like kind of this return to subtext, and metatextual, like there's a meta reality that is deeper, or subconscious reality, or wherever we want to put those things, or supra and, hypertextual type concepts, is like there's this narrow bandwidth of visible light, right? But the radioactive, or what is it? The electromagnetic spectrum goes well beyond that,
Yep.
into infrared and all the way up through ultraviolet and gamma rays, all this kind of stuff. Is there's this whole
Yep.
spectrum that we just don't see, but is imminently real. And I think that the modern mind, like we're not very well set up to kind of delve into that reality, because we want it to just fit within that visible spectrum,
Right.
Which is, where critical tools can be really helpful.
Right.
But it's not there. They aren't going to give you great observation, like you could probably read a doctoral thesis about Saint Teresa of Avila's divine, her ecstasies, right? That's very different than experiencing her ecstasies or something similar to it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like to be able to have that more immersive knowledge, you have to employ different tools, and even if you have like this certain sense of being a little bit circumspect, right? If you were to quantify knowledge, like on some sort of scale, some sort of linear scale, it's an infinite scale. It just goes on forever. And so no matter how much you've ever acquired, you're only ever just beginning.
Right.
What is always next to nothing.
Right.
It's like you might add one more unit of knowledge and you're still no closer to the end of the story than you were when you just began. So like how much in our kind of that just fact finding is going to yield us a real vision of reality. And I just think that it's kind of like losing the forest through the trees.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of what you were just saying. Remind me of, I saw this little comment in the side with Chad. We probably lost him already, but he was just like, blah, 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 blah. And I know what Chad means by that is that I think it's actually related to what we're saying, and we're talking about it technically, but essentially he was mentioning this recently in one of his conversations, I think with Philip Nickerson, but he was saying when he first came into this little corner in this community, he would get very frustrated with all the theology and the thinky-talky and the words, because he's just like, it's none of that can ever convey. It's to the point you just made, the experience that I had when I experienced God. Like it's that experience is almost like it's like this endless sea of knowledge is contained within that experience, because it's an icon and you could talk about it forever. Like what's that?
Yeah.
There's some great, you probably know this poem or hymn. It's like we used to sing it all the time. Like if every drop of water in the ocean ink and the sky a parchment made, you could never like endlessly write about the wonders of God's glory or whatever it is, that kind of thing, which is true. So, I mean, you can say that in a sense that's poetic, but everything needs to have this, all of your knowledge, especially your propositional knowledge, needs to have the ability, the quote that I always say with Polanyi, which I first read I first saw it in a tweet. Like I think Joshua Ryan Butler tweeted it because it was coming from Tim Keller's upcoming book, The Reason for God, but he had this Polanyi tweet in it, which is my first exposure to Polanyi.
Okay.
And it was, doubt and belief are ultimately equivalent. Doubt relies on a subterranean set of tacit belief in something else. And this is something I bring up all the time because it's a huge part of my journey and my experience out of kind of this propositional tyranny, is because what he's saying is that doubt and belief are an opposite, which is something that Russell Brand actually said in his Jordan Peterson conversation. Like I don't know exactly what I think about this, but Russell Brand said doubt and belief are not opposite. He said he said faith is the opposite of certainty, which I don't know if is completely true, but I like that, because what Polanyi is getting at is to say this was a big thing in my deconstruction conversion process, re-understanding, negotiating my intellectual relationship to my faith was apophatic and cataphatic stuff. So what Polanyi is saying is essentially to not believe this. You've been given a narrative of like, this is what God is, this is what hell is, this is whatever. And another one of my quotes that I love is a statistician, George Bach, said, all models are false, some are useful. So even like when you're saying like these louvers back here, or this whatever, this cup, like that's a name that that hopefully has correspondence to like the fullness of its essence. That's what proper naming does.
Right.
But like you can always that gets hard really when you're talking about subtle bodies and spiritual things. So what Polanyi is saying is that, sorry, I'll try to sum this up, is that to doubt is just a different kind of belief. Doubt is just apophatic belief. Doubt is just saying not that.
Doubt is
that.
essential to belief.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's where people get hung up. So I've been playing this concept for a while of obversity, right? So, like the comes from coinage, right? One side of the coin, the other is the obverse, heads is the obverse of tails, right?
Yep.
And like there is, like, I think if we were to look at faith as the coin, the obverse, heads would be belief and tails would be doubt, right? They're both vital.
Yeah.
And I think people get hung up with doubt. Like, well, you have faith and do not doubt. Well, doubt is fundamental to the rational mind and to rational thinking. We do it all the time. We did it before the empirical method ever arises in history.
It's the only way that you can actually correct your thinking.
Yeah, it's how you discriminate this, not that.
Yeah.
Right. And so the doubt is actually absolutely essential to the whole enterprise of faith, and belief is the willingness to extend beyond the doubt itself with like a sense, and that's all it is. You can, I sense that this is correct. I mean, in some sense, that's what faith is there's a sense that's impelling that faith forward. And I think that the doubt piece gets underplayed significantly in terms of like its actual role in the whole enterprise of belief. Right. And so, like a lot of times, like, Christian apologists will get up there and want to give you all kinds of reasons to believe. And it's like, maybe you need some reasons to doubt, right? You need a overall faith that is well tempered by doubt.
Yeah.
Right? That brings your faith into a kind of a realism, because that rational process, what it's useful for is what we're doing right now. Dialogical communication. I want to communicate and convey a set of ideas, propositions, facts, all that kind of stuff. It's really good for that. But what it's not really good for is the deeper spiritual work of encounter, right? It doesn't allow you, it doesn't position you to encounter the truth or encounter reality or encounter God. And I think what becomes kind of, I would say for me, right? For me, it is actually the encounter with God that keeps me in the faith. It is not like, hey, there's some new set of facts that I become aware of that keeps me in or out of the faith. It is, I encounter God, I encounter him in the Eucharist. I encounter him in prayer and meditation, in these less than maybe what I would say is sub or supra rational activities. Like I'm not going to the liturgy trying to pick the thing apart. I'm going to experience it. Right.
Which kind of reminds me of relationship stuff. It's found in the event of the experience of the relating to the person or to the thing. It's like if you're with your spouse or with your kid, if you are constantly in that intellectual mode of just analyzing everything, you're always a step removed from the actual engagement. Or like Pete Holmes was mentioned in one of these comments, because I think he's friends with Gungor and Science Mike and Rob Bell and Peter Rollins and all these people. And I always love this illustration that Pete Holmes would talk about with like having sex with your partner or wife. Since this is since we're good people, let's just say we only, you only have sex with your monogamous partner of life that you're married to. But in the act of sex, he's like, if you're sitting there analyzing it and thinking about it and in your head, you're gonna suck. You're not in the moment. You're not in the flow of what it is to be enraptured and caught up into an experience. And I think all relationship is like that. Like, it's most obvious in like a sexual relationship, but it's like it's being tuned in or tapped into what someone's saying. People talk about it with good conversation. It's even like if you're not even really listening to the person you're talking to and you're just waiting to speak, you're not attuned. You're not at one with the other in a sense where you're really being able to pay attention. And that's what proper relationship and faith is. Like, you can't be in your head and do that. It's like the theologian in The Gray World in C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce.
Yeah. Well, I think that you guys you're more immersed in this little corner than I am. So maybe, and I see some of the comments here. Like, I'm endlessly curious, just because it's not been my experience. I'm endlessly curious where people are, experiencing, because it's very interesting that you will, go to like a reference to Pete Holmes, and then also show up for a 9 a.m. stream. I'm actually in San Diego now, Paul, but I'm going to be up there later this week. My fiance is still up there, so for the time being. But I came back down to paradise. Where was I?
The juxtaposition between Pete Holmes and Polanyi
and a Jordan Peterson and a Pete Holmes, really far end of the spectrum. That's always been one thing that's been very curious about this little corner, is that you kind of get this spectrum of like who's paying attention to who, so like, explain to me maybe a little bit, because you seem to see value in both, right? A Pete Holmes and a Jordan Peterson. Like, explain that to me, like dive in a little bit.
Well, this is interesting because you are a little bit of the outside of TLC. You're on the periphery. You're definitely in the Grail Country corner because you're friends with Nate and Sherry and me. And but you don't actively participate with all the other misfits or whatever. This is like, so this Brandon Graham Dempsey guy that I talked about, he's been the new hot girl in the corner recently. So he has this project of metamodernism, and he and Paul had a couple conversations, and then he spoke to this other guy, Christian Baxter, and then he had me on his podcast, and then he just talked to Nate recently, which is fantastic. I would love your opinion on the Nate conversation if you have time to watch it. But he's bringing in these questions of metamodernity, and he has a lot of these questions, but to your point, he's trying to get a feel for the corner and like, what is this? And I think like a lot of people can come into this community and they try to, this is really related to this idea recently. I'm trying to answer your point, but I'm doing it in my circumambulating way. Something I've been thinking about recently is this Peugeot comment, what he was giving at this Ralston talk on iconography. And he was talking about iconography, but in there he had this little blurb where he said, pride is an excess of identity. Like, it was just this little like pithy axiom. And I was like, man, there's a lot in that. And I really agree with that. And it's almost like, I'm a firm believer in relational ontology. I know you are. And so it's almost like what a person is the unity of all their relationships. Like, that's what I think a person is the thing that is unifying all these different relationships in which they take part in. Their body, their family, their community, their culture, their language, anything that they have a relationship with, whether physical, material, or subtle, they are the unity that holds all that together. And so, but pride is almost this thing when you take, and this is what identitarianism is, I think, is when you take one aspect of that, and you and you absolutize it and make it like all of your identity, if you lose that, like I lose who I am, which is related to deconstruction, actually.
Yeah.
Like I have this propositional understanding of my identity, and that is the totality of what I am. And if there's anything outside of that, then I no longer exist. Like I cease to be. My identity collapses. That's what I think that's what deconstruction is. And I would argue, as a mystical Christian, that perhaps if we could think of labels and identity as icons and understand Christian for what it really is, as being an icon, Christian is maybe the one label that can't do that, because it is infinitely particular. So it is it is saying like I am a Christian, but it's very Jordan Daniel Wood, the identity of identity and non-identity. It can't collapse into that pride thing, because it also includes the non-identity.
Right.
And Christianity is that one thing. So to answer your question, the corner is weird. And like someone like me will go to Pete Holmes, and then I'll go to Polanyi, and I'll talk about Tim Keller, and I'll talk about John Piper, and I'll talk about David Bentley Hart. And you're just like, what is the identity? Because I would argue we live in this identitarian world where it's this pride as your, like, what are you? I'm trying to figure you out. Like, are you in this camp, this camp, this? And I'm just like, I see Christ in all of it. So like, there's not, it's really hard to pin me down to some kind of pride culture war camp, because I think Christ plays in 10,000 places, you know? And Grail country is definitely that corner of the corner. I would argue there's definitely more conservative areas of the corner
it's like the weird closet of the corner.
Huh?
It's where the weirdos in the corner like to hang out.
Kind of. I mean, it's the weird, esoteric, mystical things, you know, and then people don't like it, you know, because like we'll talk about meditations on the tarot and Steiner and theosophy, and then you have constantly like Sam, who I'm really good friends with too, Sam, the Unitarian cat. Like that's where he and Anselman love, like they get on board, because they're theosophy and anthroposophy is satanic. Well, okay, but I say Christ plays an antichrist, so I'm not even worried about it. You know?
I understand where some of the aversion to some of the esoteric type stuff that we explore at Grail Country comes from. It's totally fine. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. But it's interesting to me, because I think I'll probably always be at some degree, just because of, you know, my own time commitments. I'm just going to be at the periphery of some of these online communities. I just don't have the time to devote to really immerse myself within them. So kind of having that ability to be peripheral a little bit.
That's needed too.
It's very interesting, because there's within like this little corner is like there's not a discernible ideology, right? There's not a discernible creed. Like, I mean, there's so many different, this cast of characters is very diverse. And there's a lot of like interesting and tantalizing, like internal contradictions that arise because of that. Right. That, you know, is, I think in terms of like if I were to say, like, describe it as a project, it just seems like it's this ongoing conversation.
Somewhat. I mean, that's, Vervaeke will call it the Silk Road, or people call it the hallway. Like, it's a non-place place. It's a place that allows you to get to other places.
Right. And I think that there's some very interesting like value. I think it confers a lot of value for, there is no space void of God's presence. Nice.
Sorry, I'm just throwing up some comments. That's not to derail you or distract.
Oh, no problem. So it's just interesting to see that it's kind of this repository. It's a place where, in some senses, it's an alternative place to that deconstruction space. Right. So it's not like it's a different community than you might see in like the liturgists, right? Who, you know, are basically trying to shepherd people through the experience of deconstruction. Is, you know, Grail Country is like, it's its own little place of like, well, you think that, you know, you think that Christianity is absurd. Well, let's explore just how weird it actually is.
Yeah, it's much
Right.
weirder than
It's
most
much
people
weirder
think
than
it
you
is.
think.
Yeah.
Right. So it occupies like this very interesting space that is, I think in some sense, this would be like from the periphery is one of the things I like about this little corner, even though, there's ideologies that I'm like, no, that's not for me, kind of stuff is that it is actually trying to help people make sense of reality.
Right.
And it's actually these are conversations that are trying to point you somewhere where you can get rooted.
I mean, it's just funny how there's always people that are different. So like Matthew, who's a friend, says endless dialogue sounds lovely to me. And Brian Ortiz, I don't know that I know, but I've definitely seen his comments around. He's like, sounds like hell. So it's like a lot of this. I mean, I've been saying this forever. A lot of this really does come down to temperament. I think most of the divisions that people have, they'll chalk it up because of our propositional tyranny. They'll chalk it up to propositions, or they'll chalk it up to this culture, that culture, whatever reason. But I think a lot of it really has to do uh with your own personal temperament. And I mean this in like a Jonathan Haidt sense of where you fit on the scale of liberal conservative. So I'm not even saying this politically, although there's overlap. It's liberal.
Mhm.
If you're really liberal, a place of ambiguity and flux and flow, and where there isn't this excess of identity or kind of like zero sum exclusivism game where you need to get on this side of the line to be okay.
Yeah.
Because that's what TLC kind of is. It's just like wherever you're at is fine, and we're all just kind of processing together. But like
Mhm.
if you're temperamentally conservative, that's going to be way more uncomfortable for you than it is for somebody like me who's not temperamentally conservative. And this has nothing to do with moral values, by the way,
Right.
because you could be very liberal and have very more conservative moral values.
Right.
And I think a lot of it comes up to that. And so people argue about the facts or this or that or this culture, or this, like this particular religious tradition, which I think is just necessary. It's part of the thing. It's going to come along with it, but I don't get too worked up about it. I don't like getting stuck there, where it's just like everybody needs to be Orthodox or everybody shouldn't be Protestant or whatever. Like we all can
Mhm.
have our criticisms about that stuff,
Oh yeah.
but we need, you got to continue the talk because people are where they are.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that's a good thing. And I mean, I had those years, back maybe 5-7 years ago where I just, where I was going to, where I was going to land with respect to a Christian tradition. I knew it was time for a shift away from the Presbyterian
Mm-hmm.
tradition that I was in. And, to kind of looking at kind of the available landscape, like I think my Protestant instincts always made Rome a non-starter. I think there was just, like and that deep-seated punk rock problem with authority
Right. Right. Right.
that is, temperamentally and generationally mine as a late Gen Xer. You just,
Yeah.
authority's not. It's not even that I'm anti-authority; it's that I just don't. It's hard to even fathom
Uh-huh.
acknowledging hierarchy at that level.
Yeah.
Right. And orthodoxy was very interesting. And I probably, in terms of theologically, am probably much more inclined to orthodoxy. But I found that like being situated, with the Episcopal Church was a good fit, right?
Right.
Because there are other sensibilities that I needed to, I tend to be more progressive, liberal progressive in terms of my social outlook,
Right.
right? But there's a liturgically based kind of tradition that kind of allows and embraces that. And it
Right.
seemed like it was just an easier fit, and remaining Protestant while being well aware of its deep-seated contradictions. This is a
Right.
very interesting thing. It's like,
Yeah.
well, if I'm really looking for like some deep answer, I'm probably very much not inclined to go to a Protestant source.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So,
It's going to be Dionysus. It's going to be Maximus. It's going to be Gregory of Nyssa. That's
right.
where it's going to go. It's
Right, or
not
that's like
necessarily
Jordan Wood, he's very influenced by the East, but he's Catholic, and
right.
And that's fine. I think there's something beautiful about American Protestantism and even American Orthodoxy where that is, you're not gonna, this is the, so like if a person is a multi-unity of relationships, here's a dynamic that has been talked about a lot in the corner though. America's Protestant. Like culturally, the larger culture is Protestant. And so like you're not gonna escape that. Like if you think you're doing some romantic return to like, I don't know, ethno or like fetishizing Byzantine Orthodoxy or something, like you can't do that. That's not who you are.
Right.
You're as an American, you're an American. So you're going to be like,
culturally
so you're going
Protestant.
to, yeah, you're going to be like a Protestant Orthodox or something. So
Mhm.
there's a couple comments I want to get in here just to
Sure.
to get at a couple points of what we're talking about. So the 70 faces of TLC. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Aaron says like, this is the Silk Road or the hallway metaphor or the estuary metaphor. The thing is like you can kind of live in an estuary though. I mean,
You can.
animals do, right? And so so there's a couple comments that I want to highlight and then talk about. And Nate's here to play, I guess, too. Nate, you can come in whenever you want. This is your show, anyhow.
No,
Hey, what's going on, dude?
So
I
and
just
then,
saw I saw it was you guys, and I had to come, and it was like I still have like 25 minutes before work. So
okay,
I
so let me
figured I'd come in
highlight a
and say
few
hi.
comments and then you can say what you think. So
Okay.
Aaron is saying it's an environment you can tap into but not stay. And Joey back in Bridges of Meaning days used to say it's a bridge. It's a bridge to get somewhere. And Brian says, well, the purpose of dialogos is not itself, so endless dialogos sounds like hell. What I would say to those comments is that
Actually, and I want to get to Brian's because I really
I
actually
strongly
resonate.
disagree with that one.
well,
That resonates deeply with me.
so what
I
I
don't-
would say to that, I know you guys are going to have thoughts. What I think is that
No,
You do-
no, because dialogos is simply the structure of reality. And if you there to me like
logos in the sense
how
of like
how
logos, yeah.
how would be an endless monologue where there's never where you're just like, you know, you actually are just really just a pure monadic self, and you have everything that you'd ever desired. I mean, that would be hell.
Which doesn't even make sense to me. Like I can't make sense of that. The monadic self that has
So in that
like,
case, then there could never be an end to dialogos, or there's or you have like, or there's an end to reality.
yeah.
Well, without like trying to like, I don't necessarily disagree with anything you said there, Nate, but like to Brian's point, like there is a sense where endless dialogue to me, like, and I love to talk. I mean,
Right.
I join in these conversations, so I'm not anti-dialogue, but I think that I have like a critical threshold where at that point it's just like, okay, we're just talking now.
Yeah. If it's
Right.
only talking.
And it's only talking. And I think that there is, and this has been kind of broadly speaking, more of a movement in my own life is to be less online and more in life. Right.
Yep.
Because it's like, I've got to occupy that space. And where the dialogue helps is it maybe, you know, somebody will say something brilliant that's really insightful that will inspire me to go learn something more. Or, you know, it is good. Like the dialogue is the good. But it, you know, it's like I need to have that active life as well, you know, and you can put, you know, all kinds of labels on whatever that's going to look like. But that active life, that piece is also important. And I could see how like the endless dialogue could become kind of, getting sexy with dialogue.
Well, I think that's to your point though. What I mean by that is like, and what Aaron was saying is very true. Dialogos just means across the logos, not just endless dialogue.
Or through.
That's not what dialogos is.
Right.
Dialogos.
No, and I get it. I'm not invalidating the point, but I can see,
Yeah.
I think where Brian's coming from there, where it's like there is a sense where, you know, just
No, I get what he's saying. It's like,
Yeah.
I get what he's saying, but the thing is, it's like, but we're talking about dialogos, and he's talking about dialogue,
yeah,
and they're not the same thing.
Yes.
And yeah, there should be an end to. You can be engaged in dialogos, without talking.
Yeah, for sure.
In fact, some of the deepest ways in which you can be in participation with and acting through the logos do not involve you talking.
When we meet sometime, I'll just stare into your eyes, and it'll be Dialogos all day.
Well, that certainly is one of the ways, yeah, for sure.
I'm gonna throw out the link. Is that cool? In case one of these guys want to come in and yell at us on screen,
fine with me,
or agree with us.
Sure. And I've got about 20 more minutes, and I got to jump into my work day here. But
perfect.
I like what Hezzy said. You see what Hezzy said? That's perfect.
This Jews required embodied action, but also never-ending study via dialogue and rumination. Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's midrash, right?
That's also the spirit of the monastic ora et labora that Tomberg is fond of repeating often.
Yeah, that's really resonant. I think what Hezzy's saying there is kind of more of what in a much more elegant way of describing what I was trying to get at, is like there's a counterbalance of the active life that I think has just become more important for me.
Yeah. I have not seen this. What? Tarantino or Kevin Smith film that dialogue is not the same as Dialogos? I don't know what that is.
Oh, talking about the dialogue of Tarantino and Kevin Smith's dialogue.
Oh,
is it's a certain thing. You know, it represents a certain very like Gen X kind of cheerful nihilism going on in those two filmmakers' dialogue that I don't hate.
Right.
When does Dialogos become Trinity?
When does Dialogos become Trinity?
I think it is. I think it is inherently.
By the way, I'm seeing some comments from Jeremy about Zero that I'm loving. I've been stuck on Zero for about 2 years.
Okay. Aaron, welcome. Add your wisdom or your levity, your gravity. Bring whatever you want to bring.
Well, though, I was just really curious to hear from Nate how he reflects on the Brandon Graham Dempsey conversation before he has to leave, because you brought that up as a potential topic, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Brendan, it's interesting. Brendan and I have a lot of overlap in our thinking. He likes Chardin. We both see like the necessity of having an idea of tradition that is open to change through time, and kind of both of us see like a kind of like a ultimately like kind of progressive arc to history. Where I think we're in conflict is that I see him privileging the tools of modernity over other views in a way that I don't think is warranted. I don't think he takes the insights of the traditional worldview seriously enough because of that privileging of the modern lens. And I at the end of the conversation, I found it's interesting. It's interesting. He seems to be allergic to. He wants to talk about a meta-modern Christianity, but he seems to be allergic to Christian language, even when it's coming from a Christian as absolutely broad-minded and not narrow as me. Like he's wanting to police my use of Christian language to talk about things, which I thought was like just strange. It's like, well, I wouldn't stop the Jewish person from using Jewish language to talk about complex theological ideas because that's the language they're familiar with, and I wouldn't do that to a Buddhist. Like, why are you as a Christian? It's like, why are you as a Christian wanting to police the use of Christian language? Especially if the language that's most readily understood by people who come from a Christian culture. It's like, if you're going to try to talk about something as complicated as like, you know, the mystery of divine humanity, the mystery of Christ in you, it's like, we're not going to understand that better through some set of language that is not the Christian language about it.
Well, like you
can say, I'm perfectly happy with you saying that there are other sets of language that are talking about the same concept, and because that's fine. We can have that conversation. You can show me where it is, but don't try to stop me from using Christian language to talk about it.
Right. It's interesting because I kind of like took a different angle on the conversation. That like I'm gonna be talking to him next week with my dad as well, because my dad is a theologian and
Right.
he is like very much into the historical critical mode, but obviously stayed a very devotional Christian. So when he listens to Brandon, he's kind of like, it's interesting, but he kind of stays at the 101 level on the modern stuff. It's like you can do so much more with all this material that actually points you into so many more interesting directions. So I would actually be inclined to ask the question, where is the modern? Because like we're all like saying to him, like, you know, you're staying in the modern, but in some sense, like you can hear his aim is to move through the modern, to get beyond the modern. But the question is he really actually using the modern that well? Like if you really stay with
he's using the modern in a way that there's a particular mode in which he's using the modern. He's using the modern in a way that is trying to at least like pay homage to the critique of postmodernism. So he does realize that there are some limits on the modern lens, but ultimately when it comes to like him deciding what's true, he's privileging the modern lens, which is why he can't bring himself to believe in miracles.
Yeah, and I think that was really the best point, that it felt like he was nonetheless sort of going back to a naturalistic lens there, and that seems to be sort of like the monarchical stuff, right?
Yeah, it's like we're right back to the beginning of back to the beginning of the modern lens. Like that's we're gonna see what we can do if we just bracket we just bracket God out in advance and then see what we can figure out from there. And it's like, okay, well, you're talking about a meta modern Christianity, then we can't be bracketing out God anymore. So if we're not bracketing out God, like but how are you just discounting the possibility of a miracle altogether? If we're not bracketing out God anymore and we're allowing God to enter into the conversation again, how are miracles not so? Now there are still all kinds of interesting discussions that we can have about miracles and what miracles mean, and how like the ordinary is very miraculous, like lots and lots of conversations. But certainly, like when a credible person says that a miracle has happened to them, we can't just say you're deluded.
Yeah, well, I think he approvingly like cited the St. Augustine quote, like, you know, miracles are not against nature, but against our understanding of nature. So I think he has like some openness to that idea. And Luke, I was actually also curious because like it seemed like he agreed that the position you were at, like at some point you don't care so much, like you care more about the practical stuff. He actually wants to get there too. So do you think that he wants to get to the same point that you're at, or do you think he wants to go somewhere else entirely?
I mean, I don't know. I don't. This is the problem with all. My natural tendency is to psychoanalyze people all the time.
And he doesn't want that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I know that I shouldn't do that, and it's not fair to do that to people. What I see in him is a deep. It's the same thing that I have had and probably still have.
I want to say something in defense of psychoanalyzing people, because here's why you're doing it, Luke, and I have a tendency to do it too. He also chastised me for doing the same thing. You're psychoanalyzing people because you're trying to understand what that person is like from the inside, so you can see things from their point of view. That's your motivation. You're not trying to you're not doing it to reduce them or to discount them. You're just like, okay, I'm noticing a very strong conflict in perspective here. And then you start psychologizing them so you can try to get into their perspective so that you can see things as close as possible through the lens they're talking about. That was actually the minute he chastised me for psychologizing him is when the conversation went sideways.
Yeah. But that was all the way at the end, though.
2 cheers for Brever Child's reference in the chat. That's pretty impressive.
You and CW would have a great conversation because you are both dorks in the best sense of the word.
Oh yeah,
gigantic dorks. I know. It's
But so to what I see in Brennan, knows what I see in most people who grew up in a kind of Christianity that was very zero-sum, modernist, not open to the truth outside the truth you currently apprehend, that thing. Something that isn't open to a constant evolution, your intellectual understanding.
This is actually
propositional understanding.
It's like the fact that I never actually was part of any kind of worldview like that. Like I never identified with that.
Yeah.
That is a meaningful difference, because that means I don't have this immune response
Right.
that he might have to certain kinds of thinking. And I can kind of like, and I can take them, I can hold them more loosely by my own nature, because I'm different, because I'm not
Agreed.
the kind of, I'm not the kind of person who's ever in danger of just going along with any kind of totalizing anything.
But in Brandon's defense, though, like he's saying this doesn't just apply to me. Like there are many people like me who this happens to, so therefore we ought to broaden this, like to actually accommodate them.
The problem is that this is where I would push on Brendan a lot. Is I'm a big fan of the intellectual conversations, and we can keep talking about them, but intellectual conversations are not going to fix the problem that he sees. Because I see this in all these people that I grew up with and family and stuff, who I think are still really captured by and caught in a kind of Christianity that doesn't allow for that doubt and belief. Polanyi quote. It doesn't allow for any doubt.
Because they're still using their intellect to find it.
Yes. But you can't think your way out of a prison made of thought, is my point.
And I do think like they want to go to the experiential as well. Like he had a conversation with Raymond Pascal, and they mentioned like, oh, he kind of took like this position. He was kind of like, yeah, well, people will hear this language and they'll be like, that's not religion as I know it. And I think the examples that Raymond Pascal gave was like, well, but it helps me account for my psychedelic experience. Yeah. And also it gives some depth to a situation when, for instance, a relative has cancer and passes away. But I'm like, okay, that's really good. Like that's valuable. But then, what about, for instance, volunteering and just like day-to-day stuff, how does that inform your understanding there? That's kind of
well, he's doing some of that stuff. I mean, his whole resort center, I think, and permaculture and gardening and farming.
No, I'm not saying he is not doing it. I'm just saying, like, I just don't see how that really, I don't know, scopes up, if that makes sense, right?
Well, I'm going to have to jump out here pretty soon because I have to do the things that pay the bills here in just a minute. But
sorry for hijacking, by the way.
No, never. Worries. That's what these are
no
for.
Worries. But this will maybe launch a little bit further into more discussion later. But I'm not familiar with the conversation that was had with Brendan, but But one of the things that like I also kind of look for is eventually like words lose their meaning. Right. So we use them so much that we use them into obscurity and we don't know what they mean anymore. So one example would be like from my Protestant tradition is justification. Right. What does that even mean anymore? Like, because I come out of a Presbyterian tradition, so we were very insistent on this idea of justification by faith. But what does that actually mean? And I think in some senses it's like outside of like kind of the sloganeering, we lose touch with where that's rooted, where that language actually comes from.
The ground.
But the problem is in seeking new terminology, which I do, and I find a lot of analogous concepts in the Dharmic tradition. So I've very much been studying and weaving in meditative forms from Buddhism and Hindu traditions in my own practice, right? And it can be helpful in using those, but once again, the language problem still persists because those concepts are rooted within the experiences of the Indian subcontinent and the Indian cultures that gave rise to those kinds of thinking. Within Christianity, it's the same kind of thing. It's like there's certain terminologies that, whether we like them or not, or whether the terms are useful or not, they arise out of this tradition, out of a real history, out of real cultures, out of real people, out of real liturgies. And I think that the question of language becomes important more so in terms of how we communicate and convey. For me, it would be like, how do I convey that divine experience? Like, how do I convey what is life in God? What is life in Christ like? And I'm going to use basically in a very utilitarian sense, whatever term I can to try to convey what is kind of Luke to our point of certain aspects of, let's say, faith itself are just inarticulate. They defy any linguistic description whatsoever. And so we're trying to do kind of like T.S. Eliot will talk about a raid on the inarticulate. That's the whole act of poetry is to try to put into words what cannot be put into words. And so I wonder if sometimes the fatigue that surrounds the use of Christian language and terminology, I think there's a validity to at least the fatigue, right?
Yeah, agreed. But
Now,
at
I
the
think
same,
that there's maybe you've got to kind of be like the long distance runner, being willing to push through that wall and then beyond it. But the fatigue is definitely real, because I think sometimes like Christian terminology simply becomes a set of kind of empty signifiers. We don't know what these things mean anymore.
Very often it becomes that, and then that's that pride, because that's when it becomes an empty signifier that you hold on to as your absolute identity. And if you or anyone else leaves that, you've deconstructed and lost the faith or whatever. Come on, no.
Yeah,
But
but
anyway,
you'd
there's
say
some,
that also requires some work, right? Like, so words like love and awesome and atonement, like and humiliation. Like I understand that those words like have now like sort of gotten a different meaning, but that also, like, if you work through them, like you can recover something, as opposed to saying like, well, I just have to accept
instead of
that.
just discarding them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. And by the way, like I would actually make the same move in some ways with regards to them, to let's say the meta modern space. Like they use this language that actually I find fatiguing. Like I find it close to, let's say, the something truthful, because they're really trying to account for what's going on. I don't find it beautiful at all. Like I don't like to listen to it. Like there's a kind of almost like a poetry to hearing Pajot talk, I'd say. But there's no beauty to what they're doing, in my opinion, even though I do think they're trying to be truthful.
Yeah, I very much agree with that.
That's one of the reasons I started the conversation by getting into like the idea that there's no conception of truth that is separate from love, which is where I think we get into ourselves in a lot of. I want to address this. So the historiography was literally invented by Christians to understand the origins of their faith. I think BGD is right to wrestle with its findings. I think. Well, let's see here. Well, first of all, modernity was invented by Christians. Specifically by the Protestant Reformation. So, and I think that it was. Let's put it this: it was an over hasty move that did not adequately integrate what had come before it, because it had somewhere along the line it had lost the ability to speak the language of its ancestors, and so there's something that got lost. And I don't really see the application of the academic discipline of history to sacred texts as being a particularly useful thing to do, because you're subjecting the text to a third person point of view for the sake of academic study, and that's not what it's for.
Well, that's interesting, because that kind of brings us back full circle to what Luke and I were talking about, specifically with respect to like critical scholarship, biblical criticism, right? And I've kind of cut.
Yeah, I have no use for it at all. I actually
and I do.
I have zero interest. I know lots of people I respect, absolutely respect. Like David Bentley Hart, 100% respects it. I have like absolutely no respect for it whatsoever. I just don't see it as. I'm not interested in it. I don't think it does anything useful. I don't care.
I think so. I think its utility is actually as a deconstructive tool, right? Because but I
didn't have anything to deconstruct.
Right. Well, I mean, I look at it more as like recovery and therapy, right? There's more of a therapeutic approach than a deconstructive approach here, but the historical critical methods that arise out of Protestantism, arise out of Christianity, become a mechanism of self-critique, right? That allow us to interrogate our past and the deeply held assumptions that we have about our past. And so one of the things that I would say, like one of the interesting byproducts of the historical critical method would come into, how do we look at the relationship between the Christ of history and the Christ of faith, right? And the thing that is very interesting for me.
Yeah, but their problem is that
hold on though. Is I think that like what the historical methodologies have done is they have demonstrated to us, I think in a very cogent way, that a lot of Christian claims are simply not falsifiable. The virgin birth is not something we can go back and verify. The resurrection is not something we can go back and verify. Doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Doesn't mean that the virgin birth didn't happen. The incarnation and the two natures of Christ and all these things are really axioms that arise out of our faith. And realistically, I would argue these are arising out of a liturgical experience, right?
Yeah, but look at the language it is. But so you're taking it's like you're just privileging the modern lens. It's just like, oh, it's not verifiable, it's not false. Like no one cared about those things before. No one cared about those things.
But we built Christendom on the idea of the unquestionable place that these held within history, right? And I think for people of maybe a modern, postmodern persuasion, kind of becoming more post-Christian in a way it's not at all.
Oh, I don't think you can explain reality without the virgin birth, the incarnation, and the resurrection.
I don't either. I think that they're axioms of reality. I think they're metaphysically, necessary, right? So I don't have a problem affirming them or saying when we're
yeah, but I think Brendan does though. And that's what I'm saying. He's privileging the modern lens. He's privileging that lens of like, well, I don't know. I can't give my assent to it because it's not falsifiable and there's not enough evidence for it.
Right,
and
but then we don't give our assent to.
He never engages the part of his brain that can begin to see like, oh my goodness, reality doesn't make sense if these things are true.
Right, right, and I think that. And I think I probably have a little bit more of a circumspect value on those critical methodologies, not because not.
I have to go. It's time for work.
Yeah, I got to get going here.
I got a jet. I got to leave.
Well, it's good seeing you, Nate. Until next
time. But no, this is proof that there's a whole lot for me to talk about with Brendan in the future. Like there's we didn't even begin to scratch the surface in that conversation.
Right. I want in, Nate. Don't do it without me.
All right, we'll see if we can make that happen, Luke.
Okay.
Oh, I don't want to end stream. I want to leave studio. Okay.
Yeah, just leave the old studio. We got to hear from all.
But yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. Is I do think that there's a place for these tools. I think that I kind of occupy maybe that space in between the traditionalist belief and the modernist sense of disbelief. I feel pretty comfortable within that liminal space right in between, and just saying I believe, right? Because the what impels me towards belief is something deeper than, as much as I wish I could explain all of it, I can't, right? But I think that having some appreciation for the incredible difficulty at this stage in history for people to surmount reasons to believe is a very real one, and overcoming the language problem, all those kinds of things that can be helpful. But this will go back into a great modern theologians, like for Barth, it was, among others in his kind of his co-religionists were about a theology of encounter.
Yeah.
And I think that piece there, that's really potentially maybe one of the few or only answers, really the only antidote to the problem of unbelief is actual encounter, which I think that the dialogues can open the space for enough of suspension of disbelief to be open to the idea that God is there to be encountered. Right. And I think that's the mystic in me. The mystic leanings are like, yeah, I mean, the factual conversations, the critical conversations are interesting and to some degree important to have, but they really can't ultimately confer meaning, because that has to be something that's encountered in a very personal way.
Right. Because otherwise it's held at arm's length. So curiosity gun, what do you got?
Do you guys hear an echo?
A little bit, but you're good, man.
Oh, okay. I'm not, like, this is a little surreal. I've listened to you guys a lot, just off and on. I'm also first opportunity to kind of join a live stream because I'm working from home because I'm a little sick during Holy Week of all things.
Yeah.
About to be received into the Orthodox Church, so it's exciting.
Congratulations, man.
But I popped in probably way too late to really get a good handle on the conversation. But you guys are talking about the what is it, the modern way of looking at
Mm-hmm.
the world rather than the medieval way of looking at the world. Excuse me. And those two, I wouldn't say I know enough, but I'm learning, something that I guess I don't hear this idea often enough. When I go to my church and I talk about like the scientific method and certain scientific theories, like you'll find people that are very skeptical of like evolution and the
Yeah.
Big Bang theory and such like that. And not that I don't, not that I hope I want to believe in Genesis. I guess I'm in a way I'm still in the Peterson space, right? I want, Lord, I believe, help me with my unbelief, kind of,
Yep.
like that's the space I'm in some sense. And with a whole bunch of things, but when I bring up this idea, for instance, a lot of people use medicine. Okay. A lot of people use medicine, right? And when I talk to somebody that is critical of evolutionary theory, I ask them, so you use Tylenol or any sort of medicine, though that medicine was tested on animals. And they pick specific animals. Like they don't pick crocodiles, they don't pick fish, they pick mice, sometimes chimpanzees, sometimes pigs. Depends on the money. Like there's a bunch of factors that go into that, that they optimize for, right? Mm-hmm. But they generally pick what we call a mammal. Why is that? Like if evolutionary theory doesn't work or is completely bogus, how does that work? How does that produce any sort of meaningful understanding of the world? I'm sure there's like if I were to talk to some of the ortho bros like Jay Dyer or I don't know, Church of the Eternal Logos, right? They might have a response to that. I don't know, but that kind of idea, like that's it's sort of unrelated, but in some sense, I don't hear that idea conveyed, and so I can't quite, just throw away the scientific method, throw away the
right.
The
and good for you for not. By the way, I think that like I grew up in one of those like young Earth creationist homes, right? So that was
They're the best homes.
Oh man, I can tell you the newsletters I used to read. It's so cool.
We probably read the same one.
I look back now and I'm kind of stoked that I was raised that way, even though I've come to embrace. I have no problem with general
Creation magazine. I used to read it.
Oh yeah, all that stuff. Is I think that like there's kind of like there's this very deceptive either or that both science and religion likes to play with each other that I think is ultimately kind of absurd, right? And like it's like kind of you have two very different lenses of reality, and the idea of like you need to marry them into one unified lens I don't think is a great idea. I mean, on the questions of evolution and Big Bang and the overall trajectory of the universe, I don't think that anybody has ever been better than Teilhard de Chardin. I love his writings. I love his perspective. As a Jesuit, paleontologist, essentially, he comes up with some very fascinating blending of science and theology that I think is really cool. But I think that once again, like that's kind of this overall clash within our modern world of, faith versus science in some sense. And I see it as wholly unnecessary. It doesn't seem to me that the biblical text, Genesis is my favorite book of the Bible. The first 11 chapters are just absolutely enchanting. And, I think about some aspect of it probably every day of my adult life. I'm thinking in the book of Genesis. Mm-hmm. But what, the less that I demand that it presents itself to me in the language of science, the more I find it enchanting and ultimately true. Right. I mean, it's like, can we go back and, archaeologically locate the Garden of Eden? Probably not.
Well,
but I think Eden is like an abiding reality of the human experience that its truth can't be denied.
Pagot kind of bridges that gap for me in a lot of ways, because like he references St. Maximus the Confessor, and a friend got me this book concerning a lot of his work.
Okay.
It's just talking about his influences and his probably too heady for me. This is like a high school kid reading Nietzsche, like I haven't read anything, barely gotten through the Bible. So it's like, but I like the way that, like they because when Pagot's like in Genesis, God created the stars and then the grass, it's like that doesn't make sense from a modern perspective. But if you think of when he says, if you can go to Saturn, right? Saturn used to be in the heavens, but if you can go to it and like touch it, you're not talking about heaven anymore. You're talking about what Genesis is referring to as the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Heaven is pattern, or I guess abstraction. I might be getting that wrong. I'm not sure, but that's my take on it. It's sort of that abstract space. And I still got a lot of learning to do, but I think that is it's a little bit easier to approach Genesis thinking in that way. And also the way that St. Maximus is saying that the cross, the crucifixion, the incarnation and Genesis are happening at the same time, right? The world is being created at that point.
Right.
That's just crazy to me. Like I can't wrap my head around that. But
and I think that's like, so Maximus's point there, and I think that this is one of the things that's been so cool about the resurgence of Maximus kind of in the last 10, 15 years, becoming more of a popular theologian in a sense, right? Is that point specifically, where does creation happen? And I think that like it's radically relevant to our scientific age. Like, where does creation happen? What are we talking about when we're talking about the 6 days of creation of the seventh day of rest? Well, when Christ's saying it is finished, it's accomplished, like it's a profound statement that all of God's creative purposes have been accomplished there, right? And so, it becomes very interesting, is because we can speak about the question of creation in a theological key that doesn't necessarily have to do violence to an underlying scientific understanding. They can be perfectly complementary, right? Yes, there is, natural selection and, in these kinds of things are, a feature of creation, but it's not the whole story. Like it's an incomplete story, and it will always be an incomplete story, because what it can't account for is what this means and where it's going, what its ultimate end is. And so the Christian story of creation springing and arising out of the cross is a very interesting and I think relevant way to address some of these deeper critical questions, and you have to suspend a certain amount of disbelief to be able to, engage the concepts and the ideas. But I think once you understand like what Maximus is talking about, and you can present that, it becomes a very interesting way of speaking into our present moment. And I think that's why guys like Pagot and Jordan Wood and all of these guys that are dealing heavily in Maximus, is because all of a sudden Maximus is immediately relevant to the questions we're asking now. And he's writing, 1500 years ago.
But like this the question, like how many people are gonna be reading Maximus or understanding it? So like I totally agree. I think it's lovely for this space, but I think that would be Brendan Gray and Dempsey's point, to be like, and like what you mentioned, like about people trying to reconcile science with this, like they're not going to be reading Maximus or understanding Maximus in order to sort of bypass this problem. So that's why they're looking for a perspective that can sort of integrate these two.
But what's so hard is like, who's going to be reading How scalable is Brandon Graham Dempsey's book on metamodernism?
No, I know. Fair enough. But
Yeah.
you could ask yourself, like, maybe the scalability is the totality of this little quarter and the church and Brandon Graham Dempsey's
Well, you
book
need
and
to be
all
able
of
to
that.
start condensing Maximus onto TikToks, right? That's where it scales.
Yeah. Or you need to start with clean your room, and then all of a sudden you'll move back to St. Maximus, something like that, you know.
I mean, quality is probably inversely proportional to expediency.
Right. Well,
So-
I mean, you'd have to actually ask like contemporary people to read, and who has time for that?
Right. Like, I mean, we need quick fixes, right?
If I can't get it in a 3-minute video, I don't want it. I don't want to indulge it.
I do
hey
also
guys,
think-
I have to get
Sorry,
going.
guys,
This,
could
this
you-
has been absolutely a
See you,
great
Jed. Always a pleasure,
conversation.
buddy.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care.
Like just one point to
Yeah.
finish up. Like, I was actually gonna raise this to Jed because he brought up Teilhard to Chardin, and I was thinking, like, even, you know, like, so that was an illustration for him to say, like, you know, on the higher levels you can sort of like reconcile this, but I know, and that's maybe also then to Brandon's point, I'm not sure yet, is that even within Christianity this is controversial, you know. Like, I think Wolfgang Schmidt calls Teilhard de Chardin the Antichrist, that like he is like so hardcore anti-evolutionism. So I don't know, man, like that stuff still puzzles
Who
me.
said that?
Wolfgang
He's an
Schmidt.
Oh, okay.
You know him, right? Like, you've yeah, you do. Like, it's with the, like, you talked about this before with he has the symbolism with the circle and then the point in the middle. and the-
Okay, yeah.
So
Okay.
he has a chapter on him.
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
was
it's just
the,
so funny
what
to
was
me.
the
It's
author that the guy who just left Didon, or the
Teilhard.
French
Oh.
Jesuit?
Teilhard de Chardin. Yeah. Is let me type
it's
it out.
it's quite a spelling.
Yeah.
He's French.
That'll be put on the back burner for like 3 years. But
Yeah. Alan.
thank you so
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
The yeah, guys, could you quiet down? I'm watching 8 videos on how to improve my life right now. So you guys are just 1/8 of my attention. So turns out I need to do push-ups while flirting with 12 girls on Tinder. And
I just need to move my mouse so they don't
yeah.
think I'm not working.
But with Curiosity Gun, you know, I'm for the dumb side of the corner. So I at my you know, at my church, we're trying to do, well, I'm trying to do just a movie small group, and we watch sort of popular secular movies, and then I try and push the ideas. But with your pattern conversation, I just see that as super, like, the patterns aren't meant to be obscure or like, oh, the only thing, if the book doesn't fall apart in your hands, then it's a piece of garbage, you know? Like, these patterns in the heavenly, because I think you're right, partially that it's the pattern that repeats itself in the heavenly places, the perfected pattern. It's like the ultimate ideal that can't be bodily instantiated. But, you know, one way to like have more faith in these patterns or to see them more clearly is like the movies. There's a channel I love called Logos Made Flesh, and all these popular movies, they have the same over and over again, over and over. Well, you know, we watched The Iron Giant, we watched The Shawshank Redemption, we're watching The Truman Show. These are like some of the most famous movies that have ever been produced. And if you told people, like, you know, I mean, I'm lucky I get to do it in church, so I get to be like, this is all about the Bible, duh! You know, like, I get to be crazy about it. But yeah, like, even it's sometimes hard because secular people want to slip that punch. They want to be like, well, that's not. Well, you know, they're both, you know, even they'll say something like, well, the Bible and these movies are tapping into the same thing. Well, it's like, but you just admitted there's a thing that they're tapping into, you know, you just admitted you gave up the game. You might say like, oh, it's not the Bible, but it's some other thing. It's like, okay, well, what's that other thing? So,
well, Alan, the struggle with that though is like it's very much the Polanyi thing, is tacitly everyone is acknowledging that same pattern. Implicitly, they're all acknowledging that same pattern because everyone's paying attention to it and liking it.
yeah.
And these are popular or whatever. But then when you make it explicit, that's where the ego comes in, and this pride is identity thing is, and people start getting tribal and fighting about things, which is largely, that's my big beef with modernity and identitarianism and this whole thing that arose out of Protestantism, critical being critical, historical critical, but critical theory broadly. But simultaneously, what's interesting is it arose out of Christianity. And so even then, this is where I'll go, like the parable of the Chinese farmer. Is it good or bad? It's necessary because it exists. Whatever this is, it exists. Like even to me, like even the evolution question, pitting science versus religion, it's because you're dropping in, you're abstracting into this area where you can divide things and you don't see the unity that's obviously behind them. Because there's always a hidden tacit unity behind any distinction. There has to be. You wouldn't be able to see it otherwise. So, and that's the move of faith that Peugeot is talking about, that I'm always talking about, is to live into the unity that's behind these distinctions. You don't absolve the distinctions. They're fine. But like when you fall into that and then you start fighting with people and or yourself, which is what a lot of unhealthy deconstruction is, you're missing the point.
Is that getting into the multiplicity versus unity, or the fact that Christ offers you to both in some sense? You can be an individual and unique in your own way, but then at least once a week you all come together, organized in a liturgical way, and become one body, right? Though I don't know how to tie it to what you're saying. You said there was a split between the modern way of thinking, or there's a way of thinking about the stories or the patterns, and then what was it?
All I was trying to say is that implicitly, anyone who is participating in all these movies or these cultural things that Alan was talking about, there's an implicit pattern in it that Logos Made Flesh is kind of outlining and talking about in a more abstract way, even though it's probably not pissing people off. I don't know. Maybe people watch his videos and get mad that he's like pointing these things out. But like the fact that anyone, like, what is it? The fact that everybody watches Lord of the Rings and people are drawn into it culturally, and it doesn't matter that they're like, self-identifying as a Christian or something. Like, what pattern are they tapping into in all these meaningful stories that is making them resonate with people? Because that's what resonance is. There's like a vibration between two strings on a guitar. They're vibrating and it's making notes. That's a resonance. But it's the same thing in the patterns of these movies. The problem comes in is when you start explicating those patterns and putting names on them, that then people with their self-awareness and their egos and their prefrontal cortex, they start to identify with that or not identify it. And that's where that Peugeot pride piece comes in. Because if their totalizing pride and identity doesn't match up whatever that explanation of that pattern is, then they're like, I'm either in or I'm out. And then people start fighting about it when they're missing the whole point.
But this kind of also where you get the tension with the, let's say, the perennialist attitude, right? Because it could tap into a pattern that's so deep that it goes even sort of beyond Christianity, right? Like that's kind of like the idea, and you see it in all the world traditions and religions. So where do you draw the boundary then? That's, I guess, the other question.
Well, with Christianity, I think this is where Christianity is really hard, is because it's this is a very Maximus idea that Jordan Daniel Wood talks about. It's the identity of identity and non-identity. So like you can't have an excess of pride with Christianity because it always includes the thing that isn't included. That's the whole thing. It even integrates death. Jordan Peterson said this just in passing. I actually want to go back and find it in his conversation with what's his name that just happened yesterday?
Russell Brand.
Yeah. But he said at the very beginning, they were talking about, it went all over the place, but there was one of those little lines where they were talking about life, and Peterson made some comment, and he's like, it's almost as if the fullness of life has to integrate death. And I was just like, hell yeah, Peterson. That's exactly right.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because I go to a pretty conservative church, and they wouldn't, they're not going to show a lot of movies. There's a huge amount of movies you can't show, so I have to be pretty careful. And I kind of DIY vid-angeled one of the movies by skipping a bunch of scenes. Fingers crossed, he gets mad at me. But the point.
So like when you play Showgirls, there's just lots of skipping.
Yeah, I'm just like, this is the 20-minute version of Showgirls. Okay, deal with it.
But then you can watch all of Game of Thrones in one session if you like.
Right.
Yeah. It's just the reason I bring that up is I think this has to do with what Luke is saying is once you start to see the patterns, there's so few movies that really break outside of it. Even the movies where the bad guys win. It's like, well, that's just one. You just arbitrarily ended the movie at that point. Like, even if it's like, oh, and everything, you're like,
the exception proves the rule almost. Yeah.
Exactly,
well, just like everything that you're saying, like the guy who's the evil guy crushing all the people underneath him on the throne with the crown. You're like, oh yeah, well, he's just crushing. He's just creating more future Christians. And I'm not saying that that's the intention of the director. I'm saying, well, those people who are being crushed and oppressed, like they will push against the body that they're being forced into right now. They're being forced into the evil kingdom, and eventually you'll have the Aragorn figure, or you'll have the rise of the. So it's just to say that, like, then. Like the problem with like putting edges on it or being like, this is a good Christian movie and this is an evil secular movie. It's like you're putting these boundaries on it, which is why Christian movies suck, is because they're only allowed to talk about the good parts and they're not allowed to talk about the bad parts. And it's like, that's all part of one whole. And
which is why they water down the good parts.
Yeah.
That's kind of, like I have problems with it, but which I didn't at this when I first started and before I really went into orthodoxy, but Silence, I think by
Martin Scorsese.
One of my favorites.
It shows the humanity of Christians really well, but I don't know if it deconstructs it as well as some people have implied.
So okay. You brought it up. I didn't bring up Silence.
Go for it.
Now I want to talk about it.
I tried talking about it with my friends. It always stirs up a bunch of stuff.
I actually think there's maybe a Randos United conversation on Silence, because Silence. There's a few movies that have come out in the last years that I was just absolutely obsessed with. The Joker, Silence, A Hidden Life. Like all those movies, I just had endless conversations about these movies because I just think they're phenomenal in so many ways. Scorsese did a great job with the film. The book's even better. The book, and I've said this before, but like it's one of the only that whole idea of like took your breath away. It's one of the only pieces of art I've ever taken where like it took my breath away. Like I couldn't breathe at a part of it. And I think the question of Silence really is wrestling with is what is faith? What does faithfulness mean? And it's illustrating the identity of identity and non-identity. That sometimes faith can look like the opposite of what you think faith is. Because there's two main priests, Father Rodriguez and Father
Ferreira.
You
can use other actors. Like I call the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, and then Ferreira Qui-Gon Jinn.
So the Adam Driver, Andrew Garfield priest, those two priests,
or Kylo Ren, Qui-Gon Jinn, and
Spider-Man.
Okay, all right.
Qui-Gon Jinn is Ferreira, I think. Yeah. So, but those two priests, Driver and Garfield, are. I argue that they do opposite things in the movie. And I argue that they're both faithful from a Christian perspective. And it's very key to realize why, because I think ultimately they both do their particular strains of martyrdom. It's a contrasting of like what in Orthodoxy calls the red and the white martyrdom. Is the red martyrdom is like Father Rodriguez struggles with this in the book. He's like, I longed for this glorious martyrdom, this death. Like he wanted to be like crucified upside down and tortured for Christ. But like there's this weird anti-Christ inversion that has come within Christianity, because like that's the thing you're supposed to do as a Christian. But there's like an ego, and there can be a pride in that kind of martyrdom that isn't, which is the opposite of what martyrdom is supposed to be.
Right.
And so, and he talks about that really well in the book. And so ultimately in the book, spoiler alert, and the movie is that Adam Driver has the glorious martyrdom, which is wonderful. Like that's my dream. I used to fantasize about that kind of stuff as a kid. Like, I mean, who doesn't? If you really are enculturated as a Christian, I mean, that's there isn't a greater hero story than that.
Right.
But then the problem is that Father Rodriguez, the Andrew Garfield character, he actually had to die to that pride and that kind of martyrdom, that kind of like Christian ego. And he had this white martyrdom where it's almost like his apostasy was his martyrdom.
Mm-hmm.
No part of him wanted to do that. It destroyed his soul to have to do that at the end.
Well,
But it
I
was
like
a glorious
the idea of that. I think it didn't execute it well enough, and my point is, I don't think he needed to. I don't think the scenario called for him to kill his pride in the way he did. Japan was harming itself, and that's what it was threatening Spider-Man with. It just kept, and he was saying, okay, if you stop hurting yourself, even though you were hurting yourself with Qui-Gon Jinn, and you promised you wouldn't hurt yourself with Father Ferreira. I'm going to believe you again the second time, even though you lied, and do the same thing. Or I'm not. I'm putting it a little bit roughly, but like,
are you talking about Ichichiro, the guy that was constantly apostatizing?
No. I'm talking about like Japan as the nation in some sense, because there was the state that was
the shoguns.
Yeah, the shoguns were killing their own population to because they didn't want the Christians to be the present themselves as the ideal or the martyrs in some sense.
Yeah.
And Andrew or Father Rodriguez, right? That's Spider-Man's character.
Yeah.
He had no complicity in that. He was like, okay, stop whenever you want. Like, I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
I mean, in that situation, I'm not gonna say like who would, but like, you know, he was a missionary for Pete's sake. You know, like I don't want to say I would do better, but I feel the right decision is like, okay, stop hurting yourself. Just stop doing that. Like, I don't.
To the shoguns?
Yeah, to the shoguns.
But like the problem with the movie though is like they didn't care. Like the Inquisitor, which I forget the guy's name in the book, who's doing all this, is so brilliant. Like his malevolence and his tactic of how he was doing this is amazing, because he has all these, like, he's toying with Father Rodriguez the whole time.
Right.
Because he realizes, like, you don't know how deep this goes.
Right.
And then eventually when he figures out, I love how you start referring this as other characters too, but like the Qui-Gon Jinn Ferreira character, or the Taken character, the Taken priest. When he realizes that he apostatized already, and when he like figures out that whole narrative, and when he's in the dark cell that last night, this is really ruining the movie or the book for people, and when he's in that dark cell the last night, and he's just and he figures out the sounds that he's hearing that just sound like animals are people being tortured in these pits, hung upside down over excrement and dead bodies with little cuts so they don't pass out.
Yeah.
And these sounds are coming from human beings, his parishioners. And then he's feeling in the wall because it's pitch black, and he realizes, I can't remember even what's carved into the wall, but like he realizes, like in the lighter at some point, he realizes then that the Ferreira character, the priest, his mentor, like was there in the exact spot that he was.
Right.
And ended up apostatizing for the sake of his parishioners. Like that's that example of what is this. This is why I think faith and Christianity is ultimately so personal, is like there isn't a right answer. Like if you want to sit there and insist on your objective modernist answer to what is right for the Christian to do in that instance, and you just sit there and you allow your parishioners to suffer for your pride of an unwilling to apostatize to break this rule. The point that took my breath away in that movie is when they drag him out of there. It's that last scene, all that he's realized all that stuff's happening. They're suffering, and they put the fume on the ground, the fumi, and he has this, what Jed's talking about, this experiential event where he hears the voice of Jesus Christ, and he says, step
on the icon.
It's for this reason I came into the world. Like, that's when it took my breath away. Like, that book is one of the most profound pieces of art I've ever read. I mean, it blows me away.
Do you recommend reading the book after having seen the movie?
You would?
No, I'm asking you. Like, do you like?
Yes.
Is it still nice to read the book after? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you're gonna know what's happening, but the book is better. The movie's good, but the book is so much better. The end is, portrayed in the movie, and it's kind of confusing because you're figuring out why was it in there, because it's all these. I mean, if you've seen the movie, you know the ending is kind of confusing, and Scorsese puts stuff in there that's not in there really in the book.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It is a little bit like silly at times, and it just kind of feels jarring when they bless the baby and the Japanese don't understand like what's going on, and they kind of make a joke of that. It's just like it's a little awkward, I guess.
In the movie?
Yeah, in the movie, yeah.
Yeah, the end is a little confusing, and it's slow. I mean, it's kind of but it's done well. I mean, it's a torturous movie.
Yeah,
it's meant to be.
Sorry, and his name is Martin Scorsese.
Martin Scorsese, yeah.
Exactly. Scores a snezness. I think he's
never heard of this man.
All right. Yeah. Okay, so I'll show this. I see on his movies IMDb. There's Goodfellas. Should I show that to my church? Is that
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Goodfellas.
The Irishman is like 5 hours.
Okay. So
he's done some other movies. What's that? What's the? I was just gonna rewatch it the other day. What's the one? Well, he has DiCaprio in a bunch of them. But what's that one with Mark Wahlberg and DiCaprio in New York?
The Departed.
The Departed. Yeah, that's another good one. Not a lot of F-bombs.
I thought of another guy.
Last Temptation of Jesus, of Christ.
Forgot his name. There was one guy that did a video on it that he's kind of popular, like maybe 100K subs. I forget his name.
On which movie?
The Departed. I don't know why I keep saying the Boston accent, but yeah, he just he says that like he made a critique of it where it was just like it was really good acting and kind of good directing and like terrible script. And he points out a lot of points, but I don't know. I don't want to be all I'm just.
I may not criticize.
I'm being Sam Tideman here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is either of you now watching the new what is it called, like Shogun TV show? Is anyone watching?
I've heard it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of like because it's about like the same time and same place, but obviously it's a very different story. And I've only watched the first few episodes, but it's kind of interesting that it starts off really as a battle between the Protestants and Catholics. So it's a kind of a fascinating sort of more theological bent that I hadn't expected, or not theological, but let's say, Christian historical, dare I say it. So, but I'll let you know, maybe that show goes sideways in the next few episodes.
It's hard to find good TV shows anymore. There's, where do I go to find, where's TGI Friday? Where's where's my step-by-step, my Family Matters, my what's the Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen one? That's what I used to watch. It was easy. You just show up on Friday. Saved by the Bell Saturday mornings.
I know. Yeah. I even used to watch that stuff. Yeah. It's unfortunate. Hey guys, I gotta go. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna be wrapping this up too. You guys have final words, Alan? Curiosity gun.
Thank you for letting me just barge in and like talk a bunch of nonsense.
No, but, it's all good. It's what these are for, man.
Yeah. I would like to talk because again, I know you're trying to wrap up, but I did want to, like, a lot of Paul Vanderklay has been talking about this orthodoxy boom.
Yeah.
And then I think it's Lucas comes in. He's the one studying to be a deacon.
Joseph.
Joseph, my bad. Yeah. I did want to say something about that in regards because you know, I was an atheist for a while, and I'm going to try to just explain this really shortly.
Yeah.
But you know, I was an atheist from 13 to 25, 27, right? And I I started inquiring into Orthodoxy about 28, 29. I'm 30 now. But before that, I started MMA and jiu-jitsu when I was 23.
Okay.
And that sport and that area of interest has grown, not like an insane amount, but like way bigger than it was when I started.
You're talking about like jiu-jitsu, MMA stuff.
Yeah, in terms of
for sure.
And there's also that kind of like, I guess how Paul Vanderkleck calls it, that seeker-friendly mentality, and then the let's get you ready for a fight mentality.
Yeah.
And then gym owners navigating that. And I kind of just wanted to speak on that and like express that in the Orthodox perspective. Because my priest started jiu-jitsu right when I started showing up. I recommended him a gym, and he's a blue belt now, so it's awesome. Awesome way to connect with him. And then there's like there's the Fighting Priest podcast that I was on a long time ago, like a year or two ago. They talk about jiu-jitsu doing jiu-jitsu in an Orthodox context. But yeah, it's I think there's some overlap in the interest, and then also what it calls you to do and what to be. And I think it would be an interesting perspective to share, though I don't know if what it would spark in some sense. But yeah, just something to consider.
Listen, man, this is going to be perfect. Everything will come full circle when Jordan Peterson is on Rogan again, and Rogan says that he's becoming Orthodox. That will be the perfect full circle. Starts growing a beard. I mean, it's all
right.
It's all downhill from Papa Rogan.
Right. Yeah, in a way, yeah. But yeah, thank you so much, Luke.
Yeah, no problem. Also, Aaron, is your brother's Lucas, right?
Right. Yeah, we're brothers.
Like his conversation with Baxter was so awesome. Like, what a stud.
Yeah.
I was like, I got to become friends with this guy.
Yeah.
It's his. I don't know what his. I was trying to think of what I was so drawn to in him. I mean, he's a sweetheart, number one, but also like he just has a lot of humility. Like talking about your guys' relationship, your guys' family dynamics.
Yeah,
I kind of want to be.
I mean, I'm obviously gonna be biased, but yeah, I love that kid to death. Like, I don't know, like there's also something about he has kind of like prepared questions in some ways. Like he really does his research into people, and then he prepares questions, but they don't sound generic. Like he's genuinely interested. Like, hey, how can this question bring out the best and the most personal in you, And I don't know, like there's something wonderful about that. So he's a very good interviewer, but also knows when to talk nonetheless, like so I don't know, I'm really enjoying whatever he's doing right now with this channel. So yeah,
I'm gonna have to go check it out. I don't know that I've ever checked out his channel, but I definitely observed that as well. He's like and that was kind of his answer about when Christian asked about Dutch culture, is he was saying the Dutch can be very direct.
Yeah, we're blunt.
It's not like, but it's totally out of love, which is weird for like a Minnesotan culture, because direct is not the Minnesotan culture. It's more my culture, really, because I'm not native. But
yeah, and we tend to make rude jokes and all that. But I think he's kind of Americanized over the years. So it would be interesting to have you two talk. I think like I can connect you two if you like.
Yeah, that'd be sweet. I'd love to talk to him. So. I've always appreciated you guys. So, all right, Alan, got any final jokes, words, Trump impressions?
It's going to be a great day, everyone. Enjoy your day. One of the best. I said I might do the day a little better, but I said unbelievable stuff for everyone. Curiosity Gun, good to meet you.
Likewise.
All right. Well, that was good. All right. Thanks, everybody. Peace out.
See you guys. Peace out. Thanks, Luke.
Yeah.